Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and Loki gave us our first ever God's Eye view of the Marvel timeline, but since we aren't gods, it broke our brains. In a recent interview with Screen Crush, head writer Michael Waldron confirmed many of our interpretations that time in the show is all happening at once, and that the timeline is actually intertwined strands of a rope, branches from which only get pruned by the TVA when they lead to a Kang variant. Cool, but what? And thanks to KiwiCo for sponsoring today's video, more about them later. Between Loki and various unresolved questions we still have from Avengers Endgame, and new timeline queries from Black Widow, WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I think the best way to understand the MCU timeline is to break it down chronologically from the beginning, and then show how each of these titles revise history in little ways. And by doing that, historical overlaps and branches totally change the way we look at certain characters and events. I'm gonna call these temporal implications. If you hate it, make your own nerdy timeline video, okay? Let's start with the timeline as we knew it before Endgame, our Infinity Saga. We start with the Big Bang. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe dawns and spews the Infinity Stones across the cosmos. Jumping ahead to ancient Earth, 2.5 million years BC, a vibranium meteorite strikes Wakanda, enriching its soil. 30,000 to 10,000 BC, the tribes of Wakanda unite and stay the hell out of all other world events. I don't blame them one bit. Then 2988 BC, Thor's grandfather, Bor, fights the Dark Elves and secures the Ether before Marvel Studios decided it would sometimes take Reality Stone form. Bringing us to templication number 1. Something suspicious happened in 2988, because this was one of 2 dates to randomly appear in the Avengers quantum computer in Endgame, despite no one in the movie ever going there. I speculated Kang might have rigged the time heist to force them to get the Reality Stone from instead Asgard 2013. We're not really sure, it's just a weird ass loose end to never forget. Okay, moving on to 965 AD. Odin fights the Frost Giants in Norway. This is shortly after he banished Hela to Hell, where at some point she killed Valkyrie's lover. Then 1945, the first Captain America movie takes place. Steve Rogers fights Hydra in World War II, he gets frozen in polar ice. Bucky is captured by Hydra and turned into the Winter Soldier. Red Skull is teleported to Vormir, where he becomes the Soul Stone Keeper. Now 1960s, Hank Pym goes on a Cold War mission seen in archive footage in Ant-Man. This was part of Edgar Wright's original opening scene showing Hank in Panama in the 1960s. 1980, Ego and Meredith Quill go cruising in Missouri. 1987, Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne stop an ICBM from hitting the United States, and Janet disappears into the quantum realm. 1988, Peter Quill is abducted by Ravagers. 1989, Carol Danvers escorts Dr. Wendy Lawson, secretly a Skrull-sympathizing Kree, on top secret missions. Carol gets blasted by the Space Stone radiation. She gets brainwashed by the Kree, renamed Veers, and this is also the year Hank Pym tells Howard Stark to go F himself. Templication number 2. Howard Stark might have known about the Skrulls. Because think about it, Howard was the one who recovered the Tesseract from the ocean floor. He was working nearby where the Tesseract was kept at Camp Lehigh in 1970. So for this to end up in the hands of Dr. Wendy Lawson, given to the Skrulls floating up in Earth's orbit, guys, he had to have known about that transfer. And therefore, Howard Stark might have had some history in the upcoming Secret Invasion storyline, but it would have been a secret that died with him in 1991. Howard and Maria Stark are murdered by the Winter Soldier, who steals packages of super soldier serum for further Hydra experiments. Remember that. 1995, Thanos slaughters Gamora's people. Meanwhile, Carol Danvers returns to Earth and joins Nick Fury to uncover some Skrull infiltrators, but ends up siding with the Skrulls to repel the Kree. Carol Danvers leaves Earth with the Skrulls, and Fury starts the Avengers Initiative. Jumping ahead to 2008 to 2009, where we started in the MCU, Tony Stark becomes Iron Man. This movie actually takes place over several months, and is set 6 months before Iron Man 2. Look, there are various contradicting dates and times that are mentioned throughout phases 1 and 2, pointing in various directions, but generally it is understood that I Am Iron Man was spoken in November 2009. And implication number 3. Something suspicious also happened in 2009, because 2009 was the other mystery date on the quantum computer in Endgame. It could have involved Tony's origin, the way What If will explore the hypothetical scenario of Killmonger saving him in Afghanistan, or maybe something with Black Widow, like warning ScarJo to make streaming profits ironclad in her contract. 2010, Iron Man 2, Thor, and the Incredible Hulk all occur in the same week, known as Fury's Big Week. Another point in the timeline that will be revisited in What If. We know they take place all at the same time, judging from the newsreels at the end of Iron Man 2, and Coulson's plans to head to New Mexico, where Mjolnir has crashed. It was also later retconned that the little boy that Iron Man saved at the expo was actually a young Peter Parker. 2011, Cap is thawed out from ice and starts boxing. May 2012, the first Avengers film. You know the story, Loki's invasion, leading to the Battle of New York, Iron Man nukes Thanos' attention, and Loki gets arrested. But, templication number 4 that I always have to remind people of. During this time, Nick Fury is fully aware of of Mephisto. Because in the paperwork Fury gave to Cap to brief him, you can make out the name Mephisto there. So our devil in the details from WandaVision, surely not the only place he is. Suck it, haters. But anyway, back to 2012. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, Adrian Toome's crew harvests Chitauri tech, and then Spider-Man Homecoming, for whatever reason, jumps 8 years later to events set 4 years later in 2016. Huh? Implication number 5. Sony and Marvel are different studios with different understandings of reality. The MCU Spider-Man movies, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, are joint Sony-Disney productions, sure. But things that Sony throws into their movies are not always going to be adopted wholesale by other Marvel Studios titles, especially when it comes to timeline continuity. So the MCU ignores 8 years later, and so shall we. December 2012, Iron Man 3, that is set Christmas time after the Battle of New York. December 2013, Thor: The Dark World, Frigga's death on Asgard, Loki escapes, he fakes his death, and secretly deposes Odin. 2014, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Cap meets Sam, Bucky resurfaces, Zola's algorithm hijacks S.H.I.E.L.D. Project Insight, which for some reason considers Stephen Strange a person of interest despite him not becoming an Avengers supporting sorcerer for another 2 years. So, implication number 6, fear the out of Hydra, because they either really hate surgeons or they have sources at the TVA who are leaking the future to them. Also in 2014, the Guardians of the Galaxy stop Ronan and Thanos from getting the Power Stone, they save Xandar, and a month later they stop Ego from gooing up the universe. May 2015, Ultron goes online. Tony fears the Endgame, Vision is created, Wanda is recruited, Pietro dies, Sokovia wrecked, Hulk leaves the planet, and the Avengers relocate upstate. July 2015, Ant-Man Scott Lang works with Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne to steal back resizing tech from Darren Cross before he can sell it to contacts in Hydra and the 10 Rings. Templication number 7, the 10 Rings are everywhere and they are well armed. Soon to resurface in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, this criminal network has been trying to corner the market on advanced weapons tech for years. Okay, February 2016, Doctor Strange suffers a car accident, and we know it's February because his watch says it is Groundhog's Day, a clue hinting at the movie's time loop finale. He of course seeks out Kamar-Taj, meets the Ancient One, who had known he was coming for several years at that point. May 2016, Civil War. The Avengers debate the Sokovia Accords, Zemo frames Bucky for a UN bombing that kills T'Chaka, the airport battle, Peter Parker says that he has had his powers for 6 months, meaning that bite happened around Christmas 2015, the Siberia fight, Zemo gets arrested, Bucky hides in Wakanda. June 2016, Black Panther returns to Wakanda and faces threats from Claw and Killmonger, but he rallies to reclaim his throne. October 2016, Spider-Man Homecoming. Peter Parker disrupts the crew of Adrian Toome's Vulture while trying to bang his daughter. Iron Man confiscates his suit, but then offers him a better one. November 2016, we pick back up with Doctor Strange. He completes his training as a Kamar-Taj tree goes from spring to autumn. Caecilius attacks, the Ancient One dies, and Strange uses the Time Stone to bargain with Dormammu. November 2017, the events of Ragnarok. Thor meets Doctor Strange, Odin dies, Hela attacks, and Thor and Loki find Hulk and Valkyrie on Sakaar. All of them return to Asgard to unleash Surtur to destroy Asgard, but only after Loki has swiped the Tesseract. Templication number 8, very important to point out. The events of Infinity War were not Loki's fault, because there is no way Loki would have had time to contact Thanos in order to trade the Tesseract. Thanos only found them because he had just destroyed Xandar to get the Power Stone, and he only began the Stone Quest because cosmic guardians like Odin and like the Ancient One had died very recently. Loki was just Lokiing. Leading to April to May 2018, where the events of Ant-Man the Wasp happen. Scott helps Hope and Hank rescue Janet from the quantum realm while dealing with Ghost. Meanwhile, of course, Infinity War. Thanos finds the Asgardians, and we know it has been a bit since Ragnarok because they were, quote, 22 jump points out of Asgard. Heimdall and Loki die. The Avengers regroup with the Sorcerers and the Guardians to try to stop Thanos from gathering all 6 stones, but of course they fail. Gamora dies, Thanos snaps, he dusts half of all life, and he traps Scott Lang in the quantum realm, and Nick Fury summons Captain Marvel. Okay, so that gives us our baseline timeline before Endgame screwed it all up. So in the second phase, let's look how Endgame and Far From Home altered the timeline in some key ways. June 2018, Stark reunites with the rest. He was adrift for 22 days. They stage a comeback attempt against Thanos, who had atomized the stones, and Thor finally goes for the head. So sometime during the blip, Bruce Banner had spent 18 months in the Gamma Lab to fuse his mind with Hulk's body. And on the other side of the blip, we're in October 2023. The Rat who saved the universe frees Scott from the quantum realm. The Avengers plan their time heist, and they go back in time to create several variations. First, in 2012, Bruce Banner gets the Time Stone from the Ancient One, hypothetically creating a branch timeline very briefly without the Time Stone, and no Time Stone that Strange would need to use against Dormammu.
Dormammu!
Meanwhile, Cap says, "Hail Hydra," to get the Mind Stone, creating probably a very confusing branch timeline there. And then Tony fumbles the Tesseract, allowing Loki to steal it and escape. Obviously more on that branch a bit later. So instead they jump back to 1970 to steal the Tesseract, creating another branch with no Tesseract. That would have been used by Wendy Lawson to help the Skrulls, so no stone for Carol Danvers to get her powers, no stone for Avengers and Loki to fight over. 2013, Thor and Rocket steal the Reality Stone, and they steal Mjolnir, creating a branch where Thor would have to fight the Dark Elves weaponless, and Malekith would tear apart Jane Foster looking for that ether. 2014, Natasha sacrifices herself to give Clint the Soul Stone, another branch where that would no longer be in Vormir and Red Skull could bounce.
If only it were that easy.
Also in 2014, Rhodey and Nebula take the Power Stone from Morag, another branch where Peter Quill would wake up very confused. Meanwhile, Nebula gets taken by that era's Thanos, who then takes his forces into the future. Templication number 9, we cannot forget that there is still a timeline in the multiverse that has no Thanos in it. Since this 2014 era Thanos and its forces were destroyed in the present day, and that alteration was never patched, unless the TVA might have pruned it off screen or something, there remains some branch timeline with no Thanos, no Gamora, and therefore probably no Guardians of the Galaxy. But hey, the Nova Corps and Xandar are still okay.
What a bunch of a-holes.
But before we continue with this, KiwiCo is defining the future of play by making it engaging, enriching, and seriously fun. KiwiCo offers 8 subscription lines, each catering to different age groups, designed to expose kids to concepts in STEAM: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. They believe in the concept of small today, big tomorrow. Teach kids problem solving on small projects today, and who knows what they can accomplish in the future. They're a great way to avoid the summer brain drain and keep kids educationally engaged while they're out of school, or continue the educational mindset after school or on the weekends. So this month, the Eureka Crate gave me the tools to build this pencil sharpener. Look at it go! Look at the sharp! I feel so accomplished. It was a lot of fun putting it together, and a couple other new Rockstar staff members got in on it too. I mean, there aren't any kids in our office, but these grown-up kids were having a blast. See, KiwiCo wants kids to be fearless innovators and design projects to help them develop that muscle. KiwiCo now ships to over 40 countries. You can get 50% off your first month of any crate by going to kiwico.com/newrockstars, linked below in the description. But back in 2023, the Avengers are able to snap half of all life back, including Peter Parker's school marching band, and it is everyone versus Thanos. Stark sacrifices himself, and 2014 Gamora is left in the present day. So templication number 10, there is still a variant Gamora on the loose somewhere in the present MCU. Now that would be variant according to the TVA. Yes, Renslayer did say what the Avengers did in Endgame was supposed to happen, but she never specified if that extended to a variant who was initially against the Avengers, who just happened to have a change of heart, but not enough of a change of heart to take a knee for Tony Stark. If variant Loki was an Endgame loose end that the TVA considered prunable, folks, so could variant Gamora. I don't think we were meant to interpret Renslayer's line as everything that unfolded in Endgame was supposed to happen if one of the biggest loose ends, Loki, ended up inspiring an entire series. But I think what Renslayer was referring to was how Steve Rogers went back in time to clip each time heist branch where a stone was removed, but that did not include Loki's. We'd leave that there. So each of the 6 stones gets patched, those branch timelines get pruned, and then Cap decided to stay in the year 1949. We get that date from the official screenplay for Endgame, and he decides to live happily ever after with Peggy Carter. And 2 templications here. Templication 11. Old Man Cap spent 73 years in an alternate timeline, because according to the directors and later on by Loki director Kate Herron, Cap created a branch history by staying behind with Peggy. The screenplay says that the old man is 112 years old, and since Cap was 39 when he went back in time, that would mean he has aged 73 years. But it is possible that he spent some of that time traveling, because templication number 12, Old Man Cap in the TVA's eyes was a variant. Again, according to the Loki director, Cap and Peggy would have been variants at least targeted by the TVA for pruning. The debate is whether or not the TVA went through with it. But since old Steve obviously showed up at the end of the movie to give Sam the shield, which was a newly designed shield that had new notches in it after his previous shield was broken by Thanos, this must mean that Steve escaped pruning one way or another. Check out my recent video for theories how. And then of course the following summer, June, July 2024, Spider-Man Far From Home. Peter Parker mourns Tony Stark, faces Mysterio in Europe. We see some MCU returns of Reva from the first Iron Man and Quentin Beck, who apparently invented Barf in Civil War. Nick Fury works with Skrulls from space, Talos and Soren discuss a shadow war with a Kree, and J.K. Simmons, J. Jonah Jameson hosts the Daily Bugle. Avengers Tower has been bought out by someone we think is connected to the Fantastic Four, even more likely now that Spider-Man director John Watts is directing Fantastic Four for Marvel. Whew, okay, so the timeline is obviously a bit complicated here, right? But many of you have asked, where does WandaVision fit into all that? Okay, chronologically, the first new date we learned about in WandaVision is March 1999. That is when Wanda and Pietro's parents, Oleg and Irina, were killed when Stark's weapons are used during civil unrest in Sokovia. And then I'm gonna say it's early 2015 when Hydra exposes Wanda to Mind Stone radiation, where she sees herself in the future as the Scarlet Witch. Why not earlier? Well, Hydra didn't get the Mind Stone until 2012, and in that flashback, Elizabeth Olsen looked about as old as she did right at the beginning of Age of Ultron. Either way, Templication number 13. Wanda's Scarlet Witch destiny was probably foreseen by He Who Remains. If Wanda's magic drain of Agatha turning her into the Scarlet Witch was a future that she was able to see back in 2015, it would mean that it was not an accidental Nexus event that needed to be pruned, but something necessary to the sacred timeline, perhaps something that would stave off the rise of a Kang variant. Then, after Age of Ultron, late 2015, Wanda grieves Pietro with Vision at the Avengers compound that deposits the line that made us all cry in WandaVision.
But what is grief? If not love, persevering.
Then, October 23, we meet Monica Rambeau as she blips back, revealing how f***ing scary the undusting must have been. Important to note here, Templication number 14. Monica Rambeau already had some of her powers before she encountered Westview Hex radiation. Because Monica's body scans were blown out, she seemed to be super shady about it, and she has some suspicious history with Carol Danvers, that we'll probably learn more about in the Marvels, and she tore that rover hatch clean off its hinges. There is a history to this woman. And then, November 2023, the main events of WandaVision. We know we are a few weeks after Endgame. Wanda tries to reclaim Vision's remains. She launches the Hex over Westview. Agatha floats in. Wanda bursts some kids. Things escalate with Sword. Monica gets powered up. It's Wanda versus Agatha. Vision versus White Vision. Wanda ends up dropping the Hex, and Monica joins the Skrulls. And then sometime in some unknown near future, Wanda is in a remote mountain cabin. She uses astral projection to look through the Darkhold and hears the voices of her sons. Templication number 15. Wanda witnesses some shift in reality because she looks surprised to suddenly hear her son's voices, suggesting something in the cosmos might have changed in that moment. The sacred timeline rupturing, Doctor Strange's arrival, Mephisto ripping apart, we'll see. Similarly, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier makes some updates to the timeline. First, in 1950 to 1953, that's when the Winter Soldier faces Isaiah Bradley in the Korean War. Bradley saves some of his men, but gets imprisoned for 30 years. 1983, Isaiah is snuck out of prison after being declared dead. Templication number 16. Someone must have known about Isaiah. Howard Stark and Peggy Carter were running S.H.I.E.L.D. Thaddeus Ross was very hands-on with the Super Soldier program for several years. Someone had to know about this guy, and the fact that they knew about it and didn't do anything about it is super f***ed up. And then, sometime before 2014, the Winter Soldier kills RJ Nakajima. That was Yori's son. Then, early 2018, in Wakanda, Io helps Bucky break free of his Winter Soldier programming. And then, in April and May 2024, that was 6 months after Endgame, but between WandaVision and Far From Home, the main events of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Sam and Bucky face the Flag Smashers, they track down some Super Soldier serum, they end up defeating them in New York. John Walker is part of this, kills a guy but gets recruited as US agent by Val, and Sam officially becomes Captain America. Templication number 17, Peter Parker was a no-show for Sam and Bucky in New York. Because yes, Peter Parker was in the New York area at this time. He could have helped them fight the Flag Smashers, but alas, Sony's a different studio. Maybe Peter was still sore from his scuffle with these two in Civil War, or maybe that suit charger in his bedroom wasn't plugged in. Okay, on to Black Widow, which also revises the timeline in some key ways. First off, 1984. That's when Alexei claimed to have fought some version of Cap, and I don't think it was just a prison story. He sincerely asks Natasha about it.
Did he talk to you about it?
So Templication number 18, there could have been some other Cap successor in the 80s. That does not include Isaiah Bradley, who would not have been Captain America at that point in history. Check out my video on that. 1995, the family flees Ohio for Cuba after Alexei burns down the North Institute, stealing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s research on human mind control that Melina later says was part of Hydra's operation with the Winter Soldier program. And of course, Natasha and Yelena joined the Red Room. But Templication number 19, Howard Stark might have been linked with this North Institute. Because yes, Melina said the North Institute was connected to S.H.I.E.L.D./Hydra's Winter Soldier program, and Howard had that serum on the night of his death 4 years earlier. So either he was in support of the North Institute, not realizing it was helping the Winter Soldier program, or he discovered that connection, and that's why Hydra sent the Winter Soldier to assassinate him. Then, sometime before 2009, Natasha met Hawkeye in Budapest, thought she killed Dreykov, and started working for S.H.I.E.L.D. I mentioned 2009 because in 2010 is when she was already working for Fury and showed up in Iron Man 2. But this 2009 could be the other 2009 event I talked about. Okay, but then the main events of the film take place in May 2016, a few days after Civil War. Natasha flees to Norway, she fights Taskmaster, she joins Yelena in Budapest, and then they all join Alexei and Melina, as together they all wreck the Red Room, and 2 weeks later she changes her hair and takes off in a Quinjet to help Cap free the others from the raft. Meaning that scene in Civil War took place sometime late May 2016. But Templication number 20, we still do not know how Natasha got away from Thaddeus Ross or where she and Cap and Sam were for 2 years until Infinity War. And with Scarlett Johansson's recent dispute with Disney, we may never know. know. But fingers crossed she's still friendly enough with Kevin Feige. And then sometime after Endgame, maybe May 2024, Val assigns Yelena to hunt Hawkeye, probably part of the same Thunderbolts initiative that she has John Walker roped into. Okay, so at this point the timeline seems pretty stable, but uh-oh, here comes Loki. Because Loki obviously changes how we look at the timeline in plenty of ways. Now, throughout the series, dozens of dates are listed on various screens, but I'm only gonna mention the historical settings that we actually visit. And we'll start with the Big Bang, which based on the opening 6 opening imagery, and the way this series sees time as cyclical, may also be the universal Big Crunch. Then 79 AD, that was the destruction of Pompeii, briefly interfered with by Loki. This would have caused the Nexus event, but the apocalyptic nature of Mount Vesuvius's explosion cleared it. But then we're gonna get to pre-965 AD, but alternate. This is when young Sylvie was arrested by the TVA from Asgard, and she told Loki in episode 6 that she was pruned before he was born, which was in the year 965, but that line didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of us. Unless you consider templication number 21, the timeline is actually composed of infinite universal strands or loops. This is what Mike Waldron was trying to explain in the interview. Time as we know it is actually history coiling back on itself again and again, resetting from a big crunch to a big bang, with each loop taking a different form. A Sylvie loop, a Gator loop, and all the loops intertwine like strands of a rope. So Sylvie lived in another one of those strands before it was pruned, an alternate universe. 1549, Sylvie murders TVA officers in a French church. This branch was pruned by the TVA. 1858, she attacks more of them in an Oklahoma oil field. This branch is also pruned. 1971, Loki, under the alias of DB Cooper, hijacks a plane after losing a bet to Thor. Now this is not pruned, since we know DB Cooper to be part of our history. 1985, Sylvie attacks and kidnaps C-20 at a Ren Fair in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. This branch is also pruned. And then 2012, the unpruned branch from Endgame. Find out where Loki went. He escaped with the Tesseract to Mongolia, where he's immediately arrested by B-15 and transported to the TVA. Now that Mongolia branch was pruned, but the 2012 Loki variant is the one we stick with. This might be why Loki is listed chronologically before WandaVision on Disney+. But really, the TVA is supposed to exist separate from the sacred timeline. Though the final shot of the series did suggest the TVA itself might be variable, we're not really sure yet. But for most of the season, the TVA is a time-independent home base, from which Loki and the other characters visit various other time periods. But in the Citadel, the end of time, He Who Remains reveals himself as a Kang variant who scripted the sacred timeline that orbits around him on the Citadel, the end of time, but breaks at the end of the series. So, templication number 22, from the Citadel, every second of the MCU occurs simultaneously with every second of Loki, which is very important to consider causality with the timeline fracturing, because theoretically, any moment of the MCU could have caused that, and that could affect any moment we've seen in the MCU. Additionally, templication number 23, everything that has happened in MCU history, we can assume happened according to He Who Remains' plan. Or at least contrary to his plan, and it was a glitch he didn't get around to patching. But yes, if this makes you feel uncomfortable about the free will of other characters we've met, it should. But one of those moments, according to his script, occurred in October 2018, when B-15 finally visits FDR High School, workplace of Ravonna Renslayer, aka Rebecca Torbonnet. Now, homecoming posters are visible, meaning this would be months after Thanos' snap. So, templication number 24, Renslayer survived Thanos' snap, or comes from a timeline in which he didn't exist, like that 2014 No Thanos branch I mentioned. And then closing out with the other dates we visited in Loki, 2050, the Rockstars company town of Haven Hills, Alabama gets destroyed by a Category 8 hurricane. 2077, the mining colony of Lamentus 1 is destroyed in a planetary collision, and in the 31st century, Nathaniel Richards is born and discovers traveling across timelines and through time, spawning variants known as Kang, He Who Remains, and more. And templication number 25, Reed Richards and the Young Avengers must be coming to the MCU. While the name Nathaniel Richards wasn't spoken in the Loki episode, saying 31st century means they are sticking with that Kang origin story, and Nathaniel Richards' ancestor is Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic of the Fantastic Four. And another one of Kang's variants is his younger self, Nathaniel, who goes back in time, uses tech from Vision and Iron Man, becomes Iron Lad, and assembles the Young Avengers. And most of the Young Avengers are or will soon be introduced in the MCU. And personally, I think White Vision would be an ideal mentor to lead it with lectures about Theseus' ships. Now, upcoming in the MCU will be 10 episodes of What If that are each set in alternate strands of the timeline, kind of like Sylvie's pruning moment was, that may or may not be adopted as TOS canon in the future. So like the first episode with Peggy Carter, that's in an alternate 1943 to 45. Shang-Chi is set sometime after Endgame, we think. Eternals will be set in the present day and in the early years of human civilization. Spider-Man No Way Home, set we think in winter 2024 or after. And then of course Multiverse of Madness is coming and will probably turn all of this inside out. But hopefully this timeline helped you understand how all of MCU history is interconnected and how it is still evolving title to title. And a special thanks to our editing team for putting together these graphics. They always do great work on these videos, but this was an especially difficult undertaking. A king bless you guys. Support New Rockstars by checking out our great merch options over at newrockstarsmerch.com. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at EA Voss. Follow and subscribe to New Rockstars. Thank you for watching. Bye. Or hello. Welcome back to New Rockstars. The timeline is cyclical.